Ooh, thank you so much. Thank you, Mark, for inviting me today. This is so surreal. I remember hanging out in this basement for many nights between 2000 and 2004. I cooked Thursday night dinners in that kitchen right there, and I practiced for Sunday Mass in the practice rooms, and I studied in this room with my friend Caitlin O'Donnell really late into the night until the last chaplain left, which was usually Rabbi Teva, lovely man, and he would always tuck packets of emergency into our hands so we wouldn't shred our immune systems during finals week. But the theme today is not nostalgia. It's truth-telling as a spiritual pursuit, which, it seems like an easy layup considering the massive assist that I get from most Western religions. Their admonitions to tell the truth. Some form of truth-telling certainly is a foundation of Western civilization. But I say it's a form because most of these traditions rely on admonitions not to lie. It's not an active exhortation to tell the truth. It's just there will be consequences. There will be fire. There's good stuff there. Avoiding lies forces you to live in the truth and deal with its consequences. And truth becomes the crucible through which your character is forged, and you become more resilient and wise. There are reams of philosophy and dogma dedicated to conversation of what constitutes a lie, how close you can get to a falsehood. Does it have to be intentional? Does it have to, when does an omission gain intent, and that intent gains momentum, and that drags you into a bonfire? But that's all punitive stuff. I don't think, personally, that avoiding consequences has the heft of spiritual practice. I've avoided stepping on cracks most of my life so as not to break my mother's back, but I wouldn't argue that's fortified my sense of well-being so much as a sense of whimsy. For me, truth-telling, in order to have a spiritual dimension, has to be active, not reactive. It has to be something we do by choice, a ritual by which we examine aspects of the way we live and come through with a deeper understanding of the expansiveness of life and our place in it. You know, the easy stuff. What do I mean by that? About 3,000 years ago, ancient Greeks noticed a bright star that appeared right beside the moon every evening, just as the sky was beginning to darken from day to night. This bright, penetrating star arrived alongside the moon, and they called this evening star Hesperos. And some ancient early risers noticed that the morning sun also had such a companion, sort of in reverse. Just as dawn began to break before the night was officially burned off by the morning rays, a bright star beside the sun appeared to be the last one to blink off, and they called the morning star Phosphoros. The Greeks weren't the only ones who noticed this. The Egyptians also had two names for these two distinct entities. And for centuries, people were happy to accept this reality. Two celestial bodies, companions to the sun and moon. They went on, sometimes they even wrote stories about them that they told to one another as each morning an evening star appeared and disappeared each day. Then in the early 17th century, some descendants of these early stargazers, Galileo and his friends, got their hands on some telescopes and took a closer look, did some math, had a think, and they realized that these two stars are actually one entity, and that entity is not a star at all. It's the planet Venus. But their discovery didn't erase all the mythologies and the stories that arose around the morning star and the evening star. It just added a new dimension to that reality. But the rich catalog of stories that arose around these stars weren't lies. They simply weren't the most accurate depiction of reality. Certainly not from the perspective of the planet Venus. who I like to imagine calling out across the cosmos, like, hey guys, I love your stories, but I have to tell you something. I'm not an astronomer, I'm a writer, so my first instinct is to attempt to give voice to something rather than chart its orbit. And I feel a kinship with this morning evening star, Paradox, with Venus, this misunderstood dot in the sky that people have been watching for so long. I feel a kinship with paradoxes because I, as an adopted person, am kind of a paradox personified. I was born Mary Agnes Taggart Hall to a young couple named Peggy and Michael. He worked construction and DJ'd on the weekends. She was a cashier. He played guitar, like most of us hold a fork, with an unharried fluency that only comes from complete mastery. She was a former foster kid, a one-time runaway, and she was 22, and I'm not really sure how old he was. For as long as I can remember, he had a full head of white hair, but his eyes were young, so 30. We lived in Camden, New Jersey, and whenever anybody mentioned the city, they were talking about Philadelphia. I had one older brother, and I was the baby of the family. My parents had more children after me, whom they placed for adoption, though I, as the oldest, was always aware of my younger sister's existence, though they didn't know of mine. So while I considered myself one in a set of 7, my sisters believed they were singular entities in the world. I was 7 years old when I was sent to Oklahoma to live with my grandfather and his second wife. They'd been raising my sister Becca since she was 3 months old, and there I was placed in a fresh context, which grew more complicated when my grandparents adopted my sister and me in 1992. I was 10 years old. That's when the constellations of my family realigned. On paper, my step-grandmother became my second mother, my adoptive mother. My grandfather became my second father, my adoptive father. My first mother, my birth mother, became my sister. My first father, a stranger. My brother became my nephew, and I became Mary Anna King. That's what the paper trail says. When I get a copy of my birth certificate now, that's the reality it reflects. Mary Anna King was born in New Jersey in 1982, just like Mary Agnes Taggart Hall. But Mary Anna King was born to Mimi King, a woman who was herself born in 1922. So to anyone doing the math, that made her 60 years old on the day I was born. And I think sometimes how that would look to my descendants if genealogical research remains in vogue. When they sift through public records, what will they think when they find this artifact that says a 60-year-old woman gave birth? This is what currently happens when a person is adopted in the United States. The birth certificate is amended to reflect the adoptive parents as if they are the biological parents. And this amended birth certificate becomes the public record. And the original birth certificate with the biological family names is sealed. In most states, people need a court order to access these records, even the adopted person who is the subject of the document. Currently, only 9 states allow adopted people unrestricted access to their original birth certificates. 9 out of 50. I have always known the identity of my biological family. I've been lucky to have maintained some contact with them over the years. The change in paperwork and the change in the name on my Social Security card and my birth certificate could not erase the connections I still felt from my childhood. They couldn't merely copy and paste a new identity onto my person like they had on paper. Mary Anna King is the oldest of Charles and Mimi King's 2 daughters. Mary Agnes Taggart Hall was the second oldest of Michael and Peggy Hall's 7 children. She was named after an Irish great aunt who died on the day she was born, and her initials spelled math. Where did she go? in the shuffle of paperwork. For many years, it wasn't too difficult for me to perform the appropriate role at the appropriate time. New Jersey and Oklahoma are very far apart. Nobody who knew my biological family would ever have entered the orbit of my adoptive family and vice versa. But living this sort of paradox became really tricky when my sisters returned to look for their biological roots. And suddenly my tidily separated worlds collided and everyone was everywhere. Living rooms and wedding parties crowded with first mother and second father. And my adoptive father is all of my sisters' biological grandfather. And I had to attempt to explain to people that I'd known for years as one of two sisters, that I was now and had always been one of seven. My sisters, my brother and I talk daily. We're friends on Facebook. We have the same eyes, the same laugh, the same sense of humor. We've been in one another's weddings. We send Christmas presents and birthday cards. We call one another sister, brother. My brother's sons and my sister's daughters call me Aunt Mary, but on paper we are not connected at all. There will be no way for our descendants to trace who we are to one another. I could, in theory, marry my brother without tipping my hand to authorities, which is crazy. And that has actually happened to some adopted people and some donor-conceived people as well. They did not know they were related, in fairness. All of these things are true, even though it seems rather clear to many of us adopted people that one truth, the paper truth, is considered by most everyone to be the only truth. There's little patience for the complexities of our reality. My siblings and I have, since we all reunited, been approached multiple times by television shows that want to feature our stories. That's what they always say. We'd love to tell your story. And we go through multiple phone calls with producers, rehashing the beats of our separation and reunion, our lives apart from one another and our lives together, how we carve out time around each holiday to create a big, crazy group video call, how we alternate visits, because there's 7 of us, it's a lot, how we one time did a GoFundMe campaign to get all 7 of us in one place at one time for the first and only time ever. But no one's ever seen these shows because they always fall apart when we insist on telling the complexity of our story. When none of us would commit to naming one set of our parents or siblings as our real family. When we joined forces to preserve the identities of our parents, both our first parents and our adoptive parents. When we insisted on adding an addendum to each neatly packaged happy ending with the truth that we have all lost as much as we've gained through our adoptions. And neither is powerful enough to erase the other. Our truth is complicated. I think most truths are. Our story forces people who hear it to expand their definitions of seemingly concrete words that they've defined and moved on from in childhood. Words like father, mother, sister, brother. It begs to reformat the forms our lives are written on. We don't talk so much about the morning star and the evening star anymore. You simply Google it and the internet tells you these things are the planet Venus. We're a lot smarter than ancient people. But they're both true in some way. It's true that people once looked up to the heavens and imagined things one way. And it's true that the reality is complex in a different way. In order to learn that the morning star and the evening star were two sides of one object, someone had to begin from a place of curiosity. Someone had to say, maybe I don't have all the answers. Let me look again, more deeply. Both viewers had to be willing to look at the world around them, to accept new information, to absorb it and be changed by it. The pursuit, to me, is the important part. The pursuit is where truth takes on the element of spiritual practice. The examination the willingness to change our perspective and add to our understanding of the world, to seemingly hold conflicting ideas in our mind, is where we have the chance to expand our understanding of the world and our place in it. And in that pursuit, we can be like the universe itself, slowly but constantly growing. Thank you.